Welcome to Preflight. My name is Rob Kolb, and I'm your Part 107 licensed pilot in command, and I'm your instructor for today. And now we're going to talk about the importance of having a pre-flight checklist. And you guys might be saying, that's ridiculous. I don't need a pre-flight checklist. I'm not flying an F-22 Raptor. It is important, guys, and I'm telling you, regardless of how you fly a drone, it's important. If you have one, you're going to catch little mistakes prior to a crash that would have prevented that crash. So that being said, let's get into this. The drone that we're using for today's pre-flight checklist is the Mavic 2 Pro. I still carry the Mavic 2 Pro in the factory box for a couple reasons, and really it kind of naturally forces me into some good habits. So I'm just going to walk you through what my personal pre-flight checklist is. I'll also have a PDF copy of the actual list in the link section below this video. So as I pull the drone out of the box, the first thing you want to put on your checklist is to remove the gimbal cover. So important, so easy to forget. I forgot so many times. You want to pull that off, and the reason why is when you first fire up the drone, the camera's kind of twisting and spinning and moving, and if that cover's on there, it's not able to move, and what can happen is you can end up burning up the engine on this camera. And so definitely want to make sure you put on your checklist, remove gimbal cover. The next thing I do is I open up the legs here to the drone, and I do an overall conditional test of this drone. I kind of look for any scratches or dings or marks or anything that could mess up the flight. You might want to check the motors, just make sure that they're spinning freely, there's no twine or anything weird lodged in there. Just an overall check, especially the battery, okay? So important. These batteries, if you get a nick in there, a deep scratch or a nick, don't fly with it. I know these are expensive, guys, but believe me, once these things get compromised with a nick or something, they can catch on fire in the middle of your flight, and now you just destroyed your $1,000 plus drone. So if it's damaged, I know they're expensive, don't fly with it. So we're going to put the battery back in the drone here, and we're going to now check the battery level. So if you press the power part of the battery, it's going to light up with a green ring all the way around, and that indicates that that battery is fully charged. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have at least one spare battery, which we do. You want to hit the indicator in the center of this battery, and it's a green circle all the way around, so we know that our spare battery is completely full. Guys, whatever you have with your drone, if you can have a spare of, have a spare. Batteries, SD cards, charging cords, prop blades, whatever. Make sure you have a spare so you don't have something go down while you're out doing whatever you're doing and that shuts you down for the day. So important. So when you carry the drone like I carry it in its factory box, you have to remove the prop blades. It will not let you store it in the box without the prop blades, which is kind of annoying, but really kind of forces you into more good habits. So now what I have to do is I have to pull these prop blades out of the box, and it kind of forces me to inspect each blade by blade. And so it's okay if your blades get some nicks on the sides of them or the ends of them. If it has a chunk out of it, you know, common sense would say don't fly that way. Definitely don't fly that way. But what's more dangerous is stress cracks in these blades. And so what happens is maybe you nick something, it seems like the blade's okay, but you end up with a small, fine little stress crack. And maybe you don't catch it, maybe you do. I've seen people with stress cracks in their blades, and, you know, one way or another, that blade was still on the drone. Now, as you fly the drone and you're applying pressure to the prop here, it can snap off and will snap off, it's just a matter of time, at that stress crack. And when that happens, you might still have 3 other good prop blades, but if you lose one, dropping like a box of rocks, bye-bye drone. So I want to do an inspection of every single one of these blades prior to putting it on. These blades are also directional. If you look at the center of this prop here, there's like a gray ring around the center of it, and then on the drone, on the motor here, you can see gray lines on the motor. So the prop blade with the gray ring goes to the motor with the gray line. So they are directional blades. Now I don't think the drone will let you put on the blades in the wrong order. That's more so just for your knowledge. but they are directional. So let's get these prop blades all on. And the other thing now, you do want to make sure when you put the blades on that you're pressing them down. You turn them like probably 45 degrees, and then you want to kind of pull up on them a little bit and make sure that those blades are locked into position. Then take your hand and just grab the blade and just kind of spin it back and forth and just make sure it's on there good. The next thing you want to do is the doorway on the port side of the drone here, I believe, is where your SD card goes. And the drone does have its own internal memory, but I would not rely on that at all. I am a property damage expert consultant, so my job consists of going out and documenting structural damage. And so what happens is after I take my pictures of damage, I eject my SD card here, and I take the SD card, I put it into my computer, I upload the pictures, and guess what? Sometimes, excuse me, you forget to put the SD card back inside the drone, and that can be problematic. So make sure you put on your pre-flight checklist to check and make sure your SD card is inside your drone. And in addition to that, make sure you have extra SD cards. So right now, an overview on the drone itself. We're not into the controller yet, just the drone itself. You want to check the charge level on your battery. You want to have a spare battery. You want to check the condition of your prop blades. You want to have a full set of spare prop blades. You want to check your SD card to make sure that's in there. You want to have a backup SD card. You want to make sure your gimbal cover is off your camera, and you want to check the overall condition of the drone. That concludes the drone part of the pre-flight checklist. Now let's move into the controller and app part of the pre-flight checklist. Okay, so now let's get into the controller. So for the controller here, the first thing you're going to want to do is press down on the button on the upper right of the controller. You press down on this button, and on the display, you can't see me, it will say 98%, and that is the battery level of your controller. So you know that your controller is nice and charged. Now this does not have a battery that the battery is built into it, so you can't change that out. So really important you make sure that's fully charged before you fly. So the next thing you want to do is you open up the bottom of it here. This is where you're going to put in your phone or your device here, and then you open up the antennas on top here, and you get those all set up. Okay, and then the next thing you want to do is you want to put in your phone or tablet. Now pertaining to that, I don't recommend you use your cell phone as your flight screen, because if your phone rings in the middle of flight, it takes away your flight display screen, and if your drone's not in your sight or if you're flying real close to something, that can be very disruptive. So I recommend you have a device specifically for flight with no apps, nothing on there that's going to bother you during flight. I use a iPad mini here, which is great, except there is one problem. The iPad mini cannot fit in the space that's provided under this controller. It's too big. It's not going to fit there. Hang on just one second. So, what I found was this nifty little thingamabobber thing. I don't know what the name of this is. I will get the name and put it in the description section. But that kind of solves that problem. So, before I show you how that works, what you want to do is on the DJI Mavic 2, the sticks are actually built in below the controller. So you want to pull that stick out, and you want to screw it in place here on each side. So that side's in. And you want to put in the right side. Now, you take the thingamabobber, which goes right in this slot, just like your phone would. And hang on just one second. All right. And now your hand is much more, smooth and correct. When you have a big tablet, your hand's kind of like angled and way out here, and it just doesn't feel real good during flight. And the thingamabobber here expands so it can accommodate a bigger device. So now I take my iPad and I stretch it out, and now I have a nice big flight screen. And I also, my hands are very comfortable and not awkward because I tried to cram a big device in an area that was not big enough for it. So the next thing we need to do is we need to connect the controller to our device, our phone or our iPad or whatever it is. And so here's another thing you need to put on your pre-flight checklist that you need to have an extra one of. This just bit me in the butt about a week ago, and that's your data cord. I usually use the same data cord that's in my car to charge my phone. It got removed out of my car for whatever reason. I went to fly, found out I didn't have a data cord and couldn't fly, so I had to shut everything down and go to Walmart to buy a new data cord. So make sure you have, just like everything else we've talked about, an extra data cord. So what you do now, guys, you take the USB end of the data cord and you plug it in under the DJI controller, like so. And you take the other end of the cord here and you plug it into your device, like so. Then after you have that all hooked up, the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and fire up the controller. Everything DJI is kind of weird to power up. What you got to do is to power up any of their stuff, you got to hit their power up button one time kind of quick, and then you hold it down the next time. So one time quick, and then again and hold down. See, it didn't even do it then. One time quick, hold it down, and now it fires up. So now the controller's up. Let's turn the drone on. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to go to the DJI Go 4 app. Okay, now it's firing up here, and some couple warnings, some indications are going to come across the screen initially.
The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
This preflight database update comes up all the time. It's not important. I recommend keeping it up to date. This is not necessary, so we're going to hit ignore. And then the overall status panel on the controller, you want to make sure everything looks good. There's nothing that says error or issue or anything like that, especially the compass here. So the calibration of the compass is something you have to do on a very, very regular basis. We're going to have a part of the module later that goes over troubleshooting, in which we'll cover that issue. I can't cover it now because the compass doesn't need to be calibrated. So the most important thing on this screen is at the top left section here. It's green in color. It says ready to go GPS. If it says that, you're pretty much good to go. The one thing you definitely want to do, and if anybody at DJI wants to chime in and explain why you guys did this, I would love to hear about it. Otherwise, you guys absolutely have to have this on your in your pre-flight checklist. So if you hit these three dots in the upper right-hand corner, okay, the return to home function. We're going to get to that in our basic flight module, but I want to touch on this because you need to know about this issue in pre-flight. And so what you want to look at is, I already turned this off, but the default setting within DJI is this return to home at current altitude. That means if say you're doing an inspection and your drone is at 30 feet and you hit the return to home button or you lose signal to it or whatever, the drone's going to fly at its current altitude back to its home point. And at 30 feet, you're very likely to hit something. So absolutely turn that off. Turn that off. And what you should be looking at is down here lower where it says return to home altitude. Right now it's at 120 meters, which is 393 feet in altitude. And that's really how you want to have it set up. So now what's going to happen here is if you hit the return to home button, let's say the drone's currently at 100 foot in altitude. The drone's going to, in this case, it's going to fly up to 393 feet. it's going to fly a straight line over to the home point where it took off from, and it's going to land straight down from there. And that way you're flying over anything, trees and buildings and such, and not crashing. So this whole return to home at current altitude is horrible, ridiculous, crazy. I don't know why it's there. Please somebody advise me on what I'm missing here, because I think that's an awful feature that no way is good for any pilot. So not to beat a dead horse, but in your pre-flight checklist, turn off return to home at its current altitude. And the last thing I want to get into here is we're going to go into a really cool app called Kitty Hawk. We have another training module that goes over recommended apps. Kitty Hawk is definitely one of those apps. And here is our flight deck within Kitty Hawk. There's a couple things you need to be aware of. We're going to go over two things in particular, and then we're going to cover this app in more depth in the recommended apps module. So you definitely want to be aware of your weather. So on here, for example, it says the wind is 14 miles per hour from the east. You have gusts up to 25 miles an hour. I would click on the forecast and get a little bit more information. The one thing that's really cool about the weather within Kitty Hawk is you can get the wind speed by height. All right. So this isn't a very great example, but right now at ground level, the wind is 14 miles per hour. At 400 foot, the wind speed is 11 miles an hour. Normally it increases, it doesn't reduce, and that's important because if you're going to be flying high, or let's say you're going to be returning from home, returning to home at a high altitude, those gusts could affect the performance of the drone. And so very interesting. I recommend you're aware of the weather. The next thing we'll get into here is your airspace. So if you click on your airspace maps, you want to know if you're potentially going to be flying in a no-fly zone, because if that's the case, guess what? You can't fly. So this black pin mark here, that's where we are. We're going to pinch this screen in here just a little bit, and it'll show you all these different no-fly zones. That one down and to the left, that's Toledo Express Airport. The one that's up here, that's actually the Detroit Airport. So we're going to take this pin and we're going to pop it into that airspace right there. Now, if you don't have a pilot's license, you're totally out of luck. Luckily, I have my pilot's license. So if you look at the blue in the lower left-hand corner, we're going to click on that. It's going to say that it's Toledo Express Airport. It's Class C airspace. And then I can get authorization to fly up to 50 feet in this area with my pilot's license. So I think that about concludes our pre-flight checklist. I hope you guys can now see how important it is to have a pre-flight checklist. I can't tell you how many times I've been out to inspections and I was in a no-fly zone. That's a real problem. If you can't fly, that's a real problem. I've seen drones crash. I've seen a lot of things that could have been prevented with a simple pre-flight checklist. So guys, what we're going to do is in this module, we'll include a PDF copy of the exact checklist that we use. And later, when we get into recommended apps in that part of the training module, we're going to show you apps where you can build in your own digital pre-flight checklist. That's pretty sweet. Kitty Hawk is one of them. I'm excited to talk to you guys about that. So I hope you like this module, guys. Stay tuned for all these. Make sure you take this whole training course. We have 6 different modules at this time. We're going to be adding to those as well. It's very great. It's very comprehensive. It's going to be very valuable to new and current pilots. From now, Rob Kolb, your pilot in command, signing off.